liberal democracy as the ultimate, let's say, ultimately cherished idea of what it represents is right now undergoing the final phases of its being debunked, completely and utterly. And this is true awakening. This is a mass awakening. See? From there, something can shift into unimaginable, extraordinary way that we cannot even compute, because it's nothing to do with this party, that party. We pass that. We know there's nothing to do with the party. Nothing is represented here. Something else is at play altogether. But it won't be easy. Nobody said it's going to be easy. So this is why it's important to be aware. No head in sand approach.
Where is the true picture of society? If like you mentioned earlier, dictatorship, they abused everything. But democracy, same thing. So where is these are what we know. I mean,
well, I often emphasized the intricate connection between the state of collective affairs and what we speak of as individual awakening. Concession to the language of what these words represent, or subject to concession. If one thinks that one awakens as an individual from that existential point of view, let's say, only, irrespective of what is happening in the society, in the collective, then one is mistaken. Again, if one, let's say, is in the power of unfoldment that is so great that one have the chance to rise above the thick cloud of collective consciousness, then one will bask in the sun only. Sun here represents the truth as well as the light. But it's not always that easy. So a lot of awakenings, these individual awakenings, very quickly run into immediate contradictions within, because crushed against the societal accepted rules and norms. See? Because a lot of things here at play. We are social creatures. At the fundamental level of the basic existence, spoke about it very recently. The first two things need to be met. First, we need to be held and touched to survive as mammals. This is the power of the touch, the power of the hug, the power of connection, because it's embedded in the survival of the species. The first few months were totally and utterly dependent on that. Then the next thing is to be accepted into a tribe, not to be rejected, because that would amount for perishing. Because as earthlings, as human beings, we always lived in groups. And the only way we could survive is because we were in groups, always. So this dynamic between finding out who you are, whilst at the same time so much went into fitting, because that is biologically, psychologically predispositioned. We can switch this and talk about it from a completely different point of view, with all this trauma, with all this perspective of what traumatizes us, with all the importance of the early years, the importance of how we grew up, how the boundaries of the unfoldment of that personality is at the expense of going through the compromises, of fitting in. Fitting in here meant surviving, being accepted. So you see, when you awaken, you have to leave that behind. And I have come across a lot of these dilemmas, that people want to combine awakening with keeping that part intact. And that will sooner or later present a lot of dilemmas. Actual dilemmas, you see? So existentialism as a movement also overlaps with a lot of romanticism, even historically. Romanticism. So this ability to separate here that part which is romanticized, that idea that we somehow can outsmart all this. No, to function we need to be part of the matrix, because we are part of the matrix, whether we want it or not. We are all interconnected. And why I bring these examples into the spiritual discourse repeatedly, examples from socio-political, let's say, situations in the world, because it's all relevant. There are degrees to our individuality, degrees to how we are formed. The ultimate level of our individuality actually rooted in the collective sphere of where we feel belong to the largest group, which is signified by country, language, customs. See? And that sooner or later will begin placing its demands. There are only few people who spoke directly, unapologetically about total freedom. Those who reached that, let's say, level, understood that the true freedom cannot be unless one leaves behind the allegiance to any thing that can be spoken of as political. And yet, at the very same time, it's not becoming apolitical. You see? In fact, political awareness, social awareness, is an example of highly evolved psychological being, because they no longer need to be part of the herd. When we are unevolved, we can't stand alone. So our modus operandi is constantly swayed by the barometer of where the wind is blowing. And we don't want to be left behind, lest we will perish. By this, at the DNA level, imposes its demands. It takes tremendous freedom of independent standing to have one's unpolluted opinion on things. See? So this is why I bring this into the discourse, because it's relevant. And what's happening right now is very interesting, because in fact, the only reason why we speak about this in the manner of which, as I have mentioned earlier today, that perhaps, no, it's not spoken as perhaps, it's much more clickbait in terms of the titles of, let's say, this or that, and discourse, is we are amidst the battle for our humanity, something like that, right? The reason why this is now so prominently out there is because of greater and greater awakening. There is more light and more things coming to the light. If before it was very easy to hide things, sweep things under the rug, it didn't take much. It's much, much more difficult to do that now. Human engineering is much more difficult today, even though attempts are continuously being made. And perhaps the next frontier of human engineering would be plugging fully that AI, you see? Bringing that kind of final frontier. So, perhaps also throw something here in the wake of what we spoke earlier when we mentioned Ramana Maharshi. In that clinical discourse on Ramana Maharshi, always emphasized the silent sage, one and the only, ultimate example, this and that. Ramana Maharshi loved starting his day by reading fresh newspapers. Do you know that? He loved reading newspapers. He demanded newspapers to be brought to him fresh. He wanted to be fully aware of what's happening in the world. And he is not alone in that. Many sages of our time displayed a keen interest in the affairs of the world, although they were supposed to be abiding in Brahman. All this is Maya. What do I care? All this is to pass. No, contrary to that. No, I want to keep my hand on the pulse of what the world is up to. Not like this other guy, you know, in the kingdom of whom this character of the story comes and wants to know what's happening in the world, and they give him, well, newspaper. He opens the newspaper. Hang on a second, this is 1 month old. Can I have fruit? No, we can't. Why? Well, because in our country, we only have newspapers which are 1 month old. Why? Well, you know, if we get newspapers which are giving us the current state of affairs, and if it's something horrible, you know, nothing we can do about it, we'll be very upset. So if we read about some bad events, at least we know it's a comforting that that's 1 month ago, so hopefully things sorted themselves out by now. See? It's in a country where they wanted everything, they don't want stress to build up. So you pick up newspaper, which is old, and you know, horror. Oh, thank God it happened. By now things settled. No. So this is very, very clear. So this, in a way, awareness encompasses everything. This awareness also includes social awareness, economical awareness, political awareness. It begins, of course, with the awareness of what I put into this body, how I conduct my affairs, what I eat, what I nourish myself, what impressions I take in, interactions, where I give my life force, where I give my energy, where I give my breath, where I give my eyes. And from there it goes awareness, awareness, awareness. Nothing is bypassed here. Everything is asked to have my clear insight into what is taking place. What am I standing witness to? What am I partaking in right now? This is why in the Sangha, whenever these events take place, which are dramatic, I felt compelled always to send some message, something, because it's very dangerous to be given the possibility of somehow being brushed or taken sway or taken hostage to this indoctrination, because that indoctrination has the capacity to rob us of a lot of evolutionary unfoldment, no matter how bizarre this may sound. It's very, very subtle and interconnected. More about it when we'll speak with regard to this, why there is a war, how, let's say in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Kurukshetra, why the characters were thrown to face each other. Because none of us are exempt from eventually taking stand. We will have to take stand. See? At the ultimate hour, the stand is taken. And if we can't take stand, see, then we will simply be swept into either of the sides. If evolutionary somehow towards the unfoldment where we know that we are on the right side of history, as they say, then karmically maybe we'll be swept to be on the side of righteousness. But many people will be swept to defend and represent the wicked. See? So this is very interesting time we live in. Very interesting time when all this comes into the light. All this comes into the light. So the liberal democracy as the ultimate, let's say, ultimately cherished idea of what it represents is right now undergoing the final phases of its being debunked, completely and utterly. And this is true awakening. This is a mass awakening. See? From there, something can shift into unimaginable, extraordinary way that we cannot even compute because it's nothing to do with this party, that party. We pass that. We know there's nothing to do with the party. Nothing is represented here. Something else is at play altogether. But it won't be easy. Nobody said it's going to be easy. So this is why it's important to be aware. No head in sand approach. At times, quarantine, let's say conscious fasting on all the stuff is good. If it's done consciously, not because one is, I'm on fasting from all the news of the world. I just want TikTok about exciting things. So you cancel all the, just give me exciting things. What gives me a sense of 30 days news gone, right? Don't show me anything that's happening. I want to be free from any responsibility I may be placed in, to have any feel towards what is happening. I want to be exempt, because otherwise it's placing a burden on me. Confusing. So you see how much inner guidance there is. Constant inner guidance. Constant.